Hey, Olive, Arlo, and Frank. Grandpa coming to you in Watson on a very rainy morning. Here, I'm getting ready to go and have a cup of coffee, and it's pouring rain. Although, of course, as soon as I started to film, it stopped. But let's go ahead and do this. Recently, there have been protests all over the country. It's called Stop the Oligarch. Stop the Oligarchs, anti-oligarchy, whatever. We have this tradition in the United States based on the First Amendment that it's cool to go out and protest. And it is. Like, on Saturday when I ride my bike, I always cross 3rd Street at the library in Neptune Beach. And there's protests there. Stop the Oligarchs. So, and I'll say hello to the people. They're the left-wing people, but there's also some right-wing people that are right down from there, and they're protesting against those guys protesting, and they both have the right to do that. And I'll be nice to any of them, but I got the idea for this. This lady told me, like, you need to be out here with us. We got to stop the oligarchs. And I said, you realize that they're all oligarchs. You just like your oligarch, your oligarchy, more than you like the other sides. And I started thinking about it, and I realized that the world has always been ruled by oligarchs. Now, when I say that, I believe in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, and he made Adam and Eve. So there were just two people. And then there was Cain and Abel, and then Seth. But by the time Seth came along, he wound up having a bunch of kids, and Cain also, I guess, was an oligarch. Started cities and did all this stuff. So, a couple terms we want to look at. We'll look at the term oligarch in a minute, but the first is, let's look at tyranny versus liberty. Very, very important. Get these glasses on so I'm not straining at my eyes. So a tyrant is somebody who ascribes to tyranny. Being a tyrant means exercising power in a cruel, oppressive, and arbitrary manner, often without regard for the laws or rights of the governed. It's characterized by absolute rule, a lack of accountability, and the use of force to maintain control. So when people are saying, the same people that are saying that the current president is an oligarch are also saying that he's a tyrant. And this isn't about politics. I'm just letting you know what the rhetoric is out there that's causing me in the year I don't even remember what year it is. So, and I can't even look it up. It's 2025. Wow, that's a senior moment. The year 2025, the year that I turned 72 years old. So a tyranny then is a rule by a cruel and oppressive government. And then the second one is liberty. Liberty is the state of being free within society from oppressive restrictions imposed by authority on one's way of life, behavior, or political views. And the other part of that is that you have the right to do what you want to do as long as you're not hurting anybody else. So that's the clash of these two ideas. The right says that the last president was a tyrant, and the left says that the current president is a tyrant. I don't know if either of those things necessarily is true, but what is true is that they were both oligarchs. And that's because we've always had oligarchs ruling. Now, over history, we've leaned, and I'm talking about the human race, has leaned towards tyranny rather than liberty. Very, very few years in very few places has there been any real liberty on this planet. And in fact, today, we think that we have a lot of liberty, but we don't have as much as we think we do. And it's funny, I was thinking about this, that if somebody promotes tyranny and they get into power, then they're a tyrant. But what do you call somebody who promotes liberty and gets into power? There's no such word as a libertine. You could say they're libertarian, but that doesn't mean that they're a ruler. So we don't even have a word for that. Next, what is an oligarch and what is an oligarchy? Well, the definition of oligarchy from the ancient Greek, which means ruled by a few, is a form of government in which power rests with a small number of people. And those small number of people are the oligarchs. Let's look at some historical oligarchies. Israel in the Old Testament, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, they were basically warlords. Now you might say, what are you, crazy? Warlords? I think that Abraham took an army of 238 men and liberated his nephew Lot from the 5 kingdoms. Sounds like a warlord to me. The 12 tribes of Jacob, of Israel, they unified government for a very short time. There were judges, oligarchs, and then kings, oligarchs, and then it split into 2 kingdoms, each ruled by oligarchs. You have Egypt, and Egypt was even before Israel, but you'd have to decide where you're going to put Egypt in there, because Abraham goes down into Egypt, so Egypt was already a happening oligarchy before Abraham got to the Promised Land. But you have Egypt, Babylon, Persia, Greece, Rome. These all had oligarchical leaders subject to toppling if somebody stronger came along. And we saw it all the time. You know, Athens would invade Sparta. Macedonia invaded Greece. You had in Rome, Julius Caesar goes across the Rubicon. What's he doing? He's taking over power. He's seizing power. So you say, well, wait a minute, but you have the rise of religion, especially things like Christianity. So that's going to chill things out, right? That's going to put a damper on these oligarchs. Au contraire, mon frère. The rise of religion caused new oligarchs. How about the popes? They had enormous power. From the 5th to the late 15th century, which is the Middle Ages, the 15th century, warlords ruled places like Italy and Britain. King Arthur, warlord, oligarch. A warlord is just a small-time I don't want to say a small-time oligarch, but it's just usually smaller time. So some nation-states formed. The Frankish Empire, Holland. These were states, independent states, that formed into alliances. So the oligarch at the independent state went into alliance with the oligarch from the magnate state, and then they would form protectorates. The Holy Roman Empire and the government of Lorraine, they all existed during the Middle Ages, and they ruled the people. In 1054, you had the Great Schism in Catholicism, which split the church in Rome from the church in Constantinople. So now instead of one oligarch, you have two. Here's the next schism that came up, the Reformation. Martin Luther, Wittenberg. Bang. Now you got a new oligarch. But this was a little bit different. They didn't have popes. So the rule isn't as iron-fisted. Then the Reformation, which formed Protestantism, devolved or evolved into all the denominations that we have in the Protestant church today. I don't know how many there are, but there's bunches. And there were further Catholic schisms. I believe the church in Russia feels that they're not part of the Greek Orthodox Church. From 1350 to 1670, the Renaissance in Italy and the Holy Roman Empire, they were small nation states. Fast forward into the early modern world from 1500 to 1800 AD. Britain, Spain, France, Japan, China. These were all places that had warlords who, over time, drifted towards consolidating power into oligarchies, and then eventually you have these empires. Every one of them was an empire. Britain, Spain, France, Japan, and China. And unification accelerated during this consolidation period. And so oligarchs wound up controlling more people. Instead of what I was saying, usually the smaller time is the warlords. But they're oligarchs too. They're just a smaller version of it. You're further from the seat of power. So you're going to have less of your demands met, trust me. And most people on the earth have had very little to demand. They just took whatever was given to them. Now let's see, because we're going to start to get into a little more modern thing, but we're still back like around 1600. The rise of corporations. So today, you may think that all corporations are evil or that all corporations are wonderful, but what they're meant to do is to separate people from liability. So you can just say you're trying to invent some kind of a wonder drug, but it could kill everybody. Well, your corporation can get sued, but if you haven't done anything illegal, it puts a wall up between you and the consumer. So they can sue the company and take away all the company's assets, but they can't sue you. Well, the first ones, now this, I think there were some that were a little bit earlier in the 1400s in France, but they weren't the same thing as these. The Dutch East India Company and the British East India Company. These were corporations set up by aspiring empires to take over the world and control it monetarily. So this amped it up to another level. So now we have corporations involved, and they are oligarchies. They're an oligarchy within an oligarchy. because they're controlled by the country. Now, in the 20th century to the present, some horrible oligarchies formed. Dystopian empires like Nazi Germany, Soviet Russia, Red China, the current North Korea, where people are starving all the time. It's horrible. There was uber unification. So you see, there's a pattern over time, consolidation of power, and more horrible things because they have more technology. They can kill more people. Now, recently, we don't kill as many people in war, but we could. And if a real war starts, a war like World War II, could wipe out half the planet before anybody got enough sense to say, hey, let's stop the madness. Okay, let's look at the USA. 1789 to 1797, our president was George Washington. He was a citizen soldier. He was the founding father of the founding fathers, the father of our nation. And all those founding fathers were oligarchs. They were part of oligarchies, usually based in their states or commonwealths, and they consolidated power in 1776 and 1781. Then in 1794, trade unions started. And that gave us a different kind of oligarch. And an oligarch that if you were a common worker, that was on your side. So you had an oligarch. One of the problems with the unions is that they quite often get enamored with the lifestyle of the corporations, and they bail on us, and they just become worthless. Not all of them, but some of them have. So then in 1861 to 1865, oligarch in charge of our country was Abraham Lincoln. This is 64 years after Washington left. And this is not about, like I said, politics or about history, like who was right and who was wrong kind of history. But we consolidated power, but it was a good thing. We emancipated a huge portion of the people who we had imported into this country and enslaved. And so that happened within 64 years of the country being formed. Then 68 years after that, 1933 to 1945, Franklin D. Roosevelt was our oligarch. And his whole thing was guns over butter. You know, what do you want, guns or butter? In fact, that was John Maynard Keynes, an economist, left-wing economist. That was his famous line. And Lyndon Baines Johnson in 1964 used that, like, what do you want, guns or butter? And he gave us a lot of both, I guess. What happens in this is under the guise of democracy, an oligarch tells us what we need. So at this point in time, when the Roosevelt administration was in, government started taking over a lot of things. So once again, the oligarchy consolidated its power. Then from 1949 to in 1949, George Orwell. Now, this is the book 1949. I'm sorry, 1984. In the book 1984, not in the year 1984. It was written in the 30s, I think. George Orwell gave us this awesome illustration of what happens when oligarchs seize power, seize the mind. This was the extreme dystopian vision of don't let this happen to you. There were 3 oligarchies in the book. There was Oceania, which really was US, Britain, and Australia. Eurasia, which was Russia and Europe. And East Asia, which was China and Japan. And all they did was fight wars against each other. Now, I don't want to say that I've seen that recently, but for the 20th and 21st century, all that planet Earth has been doing is watching and participating in oligarchs making war on each other. And during that time, in our history, the military-industrial complex has arisen. And so now, go back to the corporations. Their oligarchs make a lot of money. And if you notice, all the people working in Washington, D.C. make a lot of money. Talking about the politicians. They make a decent salary, but boy, oh boy, they consider that one of their benefits is being able to take money from people to spread their agenda. So the military-industrial complex is very, very powerful in Washington. And they want these wars to go on forever. It's now 2025, 80 years after FDR, and we have a corporate guy in the White House. But he's looking at it differently. Instead of corporation being there for the government to control the people, like in those original, like the British East India Company and the military-industrial complex, he's making it so that the citizens are the shareholders of the American corporation, of the government. Although you just came in here and interrupted and called me, you and your mom. You were telling me about Stretchy and, I forget, Chewy. Stretchy and Chewy. Anyway, as we developed travel and communications, larger areas could be conquered. But first, we conquered them by war. But then, now we can conquer by interconnectivity. A few corporations run the whole world now. The military-industrial complex, big pharma, big agriculture, they're all owned by like maybe 4 or 5 giant trillionaire type corporations. Let's look at 2 ways to deal with that. One is globalism. Globalism is the operation or planning of economic and foreign policy on a global basis. They believe in things like open borders, tariffs, and foreign aid. The last president was a globalist. This president is a populist. Populism is it's like a spectrum. It's a range of political stances that emphasize the ideas of the common people and often position this group in opposition to the perceived elite, quote unquote. It is frequently associated with anti-establishment and anti-political sentiment. Well, the current ones are populists. They're right-wing populists, but Bernie Sanders is a left-wing populist. And if you look at the world through globalism and populism, decide which you believe is the way we should run our world. Now, for me, I'm a populist and I'm a libertarian, so I tend to lean to the right. Although socially, I'm a liberal. Conservative, fiscally, I'm a conservative. I believe that we need a populist oligarchy with a strong oligarch. We would love to be able to have what they had in Athens, where everybody votes on everything, but that devolves into craziness and war. We're always going to have leaders. We're always going to have oligarchs, but we want to try to get the ones in there who actually bring us to the table. And I'm not making a case for any of the people that have been in office in the last, since I've been alive. None of them. But choose your oligarch wisely. Be a student of history, a student of politics, and look into all this stuff. When you go into the voting booth, know what you're voting for, because it could be the difference between heaven and hell. Peace out.